Hi, I'm Tom Migot from Tom Migot Photography. In our previous episode, we talked about a freshly baked Adobe Lightroom 6 and the new features that comes in it. We also spent some time looking at the brand new feature called the HDR Merge. And if you haven't watched that episode, well, I invite you to click on the link right now. Today, I want to talk to you about the feature that I believe is the most important in Lightroom 6, the one that had to make Lightroom 6. And it's got to do with a graduated filter or a radial filter and an adjustment brush. I know the three of them aren't new, but once they meet each other, now you get a much powerful tool, and that's what we're going to see today. So to do this, we will use the result of our HDR from the previous episode. This is exactly what you see here on the screen. But before we actually use this, I want to show you first on a blank image to show you how the tool works. So what we got, white image, you go to the graduated filter. You're pretty familiar with a graduated filter, I imagine. So the way it works is that you have a filter, and look, I'm going to drag and create this gradation. Perfect, that's brilliant. But look now, we have a new section inside the graduated filter, and it says brush. Once you select the brush, you end up having a normal brush. You see A, B, and erase. You even have the auto mask, and that's amazing. So if you actually go to the erase now, and you just go and look, I'm actually erasing my graduated filter. This is fantastic, and you'll see more when we use it on the real photograph. It just opens the doors. Then obviously there's more to it than just erasing. You see, we still have brush A. And the way brush A works is that brush A will actually use the parameters of your graduated filter. So that particular color that you see here at the top, that is exactly what my brush is going to create. So look at this. This is exactly it. But as you notice, this is not graduated anymore. So that you need to understand this. Let's imagine you actually erase a part of the picture where you don't want your graduated filter to apply. So use the erase feature of that brush inside the graduated filter. But you got to be very careful, because if you actually erase too much, don't think that you can just use the A brush just to repaint over, because you will lose the graduation. So that's a very important thing to remember. Another cool thing as well is the overlay. I love overlay when I use adjustment brush. And to do this, you just press the O key. And now we have it. We have an overlay, and it's in gray. But if you actually hold the Shift key while you press O, you will go through different colors. The first one is going to be red. The next one is going to be green. Then a white one, which obviously here against white doesn't really work. And then you disable it. Why that? Because just like you see here against the white, having a white overlay doesn't make any sense. You won't see the difference. Well, in real life, when you take pictures of nature, for example, you may have a dominance in green. Having an overlay in green is not going to help you. But if you have an overlay in red, it will work. On the contrary, there are places where the background is going to tend to be more brown or more reddish. Well, in that case, you may want to have an overlay in green so you can actually see the overlay better, especially the zone where you're actually making your modification. So going through all these overlay colors, I think it's a neat improvement as well. Another thing that you need to know is that what I just showed you here with the graduated filter, well, it exists as well with a radial filter. So if I'm actually using the radial filter now, and I'm just making it like this, right? Let me just remove the overlay so you can see. Well, I can just go to the brush, and if I like this setting, I love the radial filter. I use this most of the time when I'm taking a photo and the faces are a little bit underexposed, just simply because the back scene is actually pretty bright. So when I take my exposure, I go for something in the middle, but I want to make sure that the background, my sky, is not blown out. I hate sky to be totally white. So sometimes it does happen that my subjects tend to be underexposed. So in that case, I use the radial filter to just lit the faces. And if I have more than one face, I can actually either clone the radial filter, or I can just simply now apply the setting to one, and then once I'm happy with it, just do the other on the other face. And that works just the same. So that's an interesting thing. So let's go in a real image. This is the result of our HDR from the last episode. Before I start modifying it, I want to show you another feature. It's about straightening. You see that image, although I was using a tripod, it's not really straight. Or Actually, it is, but it's falsely straight. What I mean by this is that you may think that it's actually not straight, but some part of the image are straight, and therefore it's got to do with perspective. There's so many details, so you need to figure out what you want to be straight. But let's, for argument's sake, that this is not straight. You can just go to the crop tool, and there's now the auto feature. If I click on the auto feature, it will try to align this. So it didn't do much, but it did a little bit. You see now in minus 0.28. So it did something, but that's not enough. So the next step for me, since it's not a matter of straightening it, it's the whole perspective, I'm going to go to a feature that was introduced in Lightroom 5. And it's got to do with the lens correction. You go here in the lens correction panel, and you just press on the full. And you see suddenly we've got an image is more straight, it's more realistic to me. So that's just something that I wanted you to know about the crop tool, to straighten much faster, but also to remind yourself about this perspective tool inside the lens correction. And it's not because your lens correction is set up automatically to correct your lens that you cannot use the feature afterwards to just correct this perspective. So now that this is done, let's go back to the top and play with the graded filter. This is a very good example where you would want to use a graded filter. You see, it was shot at night. The sky is pretty dark, but it's bland. It lacks drama, it lacks punch, and I want something that's going to help me reveal this beautiful building that I have in front of me. So I want my sky to be darker, I want my sky to be bluer. That's going to match the bridge as well, that was lit in blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a blue temperature. I like the red tint, that's going to help as well a little bit. The exposure, we don't want to go totally dark, but somewhere around 2 stops, that should be okay. And anyway, we can always change that. So let's create the graduated. Here we go. Quite like this. And now let's drag it so we cover our sky. Yeah, I think somewhere like this is going to be okay. Obviously, you see what the problem is. The problem is that now with the graded filter, I've actually covered my building, and that's awful. So we have the brush now. So by selecting the brush, and we go to the erase feature of the brush, I am now going to reveal my building. And for those of you who may wonder, why is it so slow? I want to talk to you, open a parenthesis right now, to talk about the performance in Lightroom 6. In the previous episode, I told you that in Lightroom 6, now we utilize the GPU. And that is great. But what I forgot to tell you is why Adobe did this. It was not to improve overall the experience in Lightroom. It was to make sure that those of us who use big display, 4K or 5K display, keep the same experience in Lightroom. You see, the bigger your display and the higher the resolution of your display, the more pixels you're going to have. And that takes a lot of resources to build your image. And so that's the reason why Adobe decided to utilize the GPU. So if you have a normal display, you're not going to see any improvement using Lightroom 6 and enabling the GPU. Then obviously the GPU depends on your graphic card, and all graphic cards are not equal. Even if there would be 2 gig, 2 gig from 2 years ago or 2 gig of today, it's not going to be the same. Then another thing to bear in mind is that the GPU utilization does not work everywhere in Lightroom. As a matter of fact, it only works in a developed module. And it does not work with every tool. It will work with the basic panel, it will work with straightening, cropping, lens correction, the radial and the graduated filter, but it will not work with the adjustment brush. And that is very important. It will not work either with the heel spot tool. So I made the changes inside my blog here just to make sure that people get the record straight. And so if you think that Lightroom is still slow in Lightroom 6, then you might be using the brush. Truth be told, is I found Lightroom pretty slow, especially when I use the adjustment brush, because there's a lot of information. And you see, when I did this version here earlier, let me show you the history. You will understand. I mean, look, it's taking a long time to render the image because there's a lot of information. There are hundreds of brush strokes that I did on this image. just to make sure that I had the contour of my building really, really clean, and to remove that graduated filter effect. And you see it's still rendering the image. It takes a lot of power. So yes, Lightroom 6 is still slow. It needs to improve. So that was my parenthesis. Going back here. So as you can see here, this is how we clean it. My advice to you is when you're going to use the brush and erase the zone, make sure you zoom in, right? Because I'm a big fan of the auto mask here, but the auto mask would not work properly here. The reason is my sky was kind of grayish. My building is kind of grayish. Lightroom is going to have difficulty to actually see the real contrast between the sky and the building, and my erase tool is going to basically erase over the sky, which I do not want. So in that case, what you do, you zoom in. For me on my big screen, I gotta zoom to somewhere around 4:1. And my advice as well is to go do the edges first. It's going to take quite some time, and I'm pretty picky when I do this. So take your time. And as we saw in the previous with a white image, you cannot undo when you erase too much. So bear that in mind. And once you've done the contour, then afterwards you can zoom out and just simply go and do the rest in the middle. So that would be it. And obviously you can change your settings, your values of the gradient filter afterwards. There's no problem. Another cool thing that I want to show you is that you see I've applied the changes here on the two towers. I call them towers, but they're not really towers. But if I now move, so let me go back to the gradient. If I now hold the pin, and I can move up and down my filter. So far nothing new. But look what happened when it comes to the zone that I erased. If I just flip my graduated filter, and to make it even more, let me just reduce the gradation and let me move it this way. You see I tilted, but look at the zone that I erased. It doesn't tilt, it stays the same. And that's very important to remember. So when the zone that you use the brush is not defining the graduated filter depending on its orientation. It really defines a zone in the picture, and that's very, very cool. So you see, for me, using the brush inside the graduated filter is amazing, because how many of you, just like me, had to deal with skies, and you've got a building in front, and you were trying to go on the side, on the right, on the left, try to not go over your building, and that was a pain. Now you can finally deal with it. So to me, this is a fantastic feature. So tell me in the comments what you think of this feature. Do you agree with me? This is really remarkable and is very welcome. And in our next episode, we will talk about another feature. We're going to see how we can do panorama just staying inside Lightroom without using any other tool, not even Photoshop. So until then, this is Migot saying, if you like it, well, capture it and edit it in Lightroom, and maybe in Lightroom 6. Ciao.